Okay, when we left off, we were talking about your tenure at the TV Academy.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about those Emmy negotiations, you know, how that worked
Okay.
with the Wheel and what your involvement was in those.
Well, we had an 8-year contract that I believe ended in 2010. I got here in 2006. So we had to go do a new deal. One of the discussions internally was, do we want to do a new Wheel agreement with the 4 old networks, or do we want to go to cable, which might pay us more, but we'd have less viewers? Internally, we decided there should be one more round for the networks at least. But our lawyer who negotiated for us, Kenny Ziffrin, a really great guy who does it free for the Academy, thought that if we can make a long-term deal with the networks, that would be a good idea. Because they're still the networks and they still get large audiences. And he pointed out, I think it was the SAG Awards, one of the award shows went to cable. And even though they do well as far as on cable, they don't have anywhere near the audience that the Emmys have on network TV. So the meetings went on with representatives of all 4 networks. And even though they pay a lot for the Golden Globes and the Grammys and the Oscars, for some reason, the television networks don't like to pay a lot for the television awards, the Emmys. So it was a rough negotiation in the sense that not only do they have to negotiate with the Academy, they have to negotiate with each other. Because getting the 4 networks to agree on a price with lawyers to make sure there's no collusion is very difficult. And the Academy made a new deal for 8 years at about a 10% increase, which was still much lower, much lower than the other award shows. But it was good enough that we can survive because of our membership dues, because of our magazine rates, because of our award contest entries, and all the other things that over the years we've made stronger. So between the international fee and the domestic fee, because we do get paid by international companies for the Emmys, we have over the years gone down from 65% of the budget to 60 to 55 to 50, and now I believe the 2 fees together are about 40% of the income. So the Academy can pretty much survive pretty strongly on its own. It needs a fee, but it's become more self-reliant on all the other things, which is one of the goals I had in my own mind when I came in, plus all the money in the bank helps. I wanted to have enough money in the bank to go a year without a network fee, but now we have enough money to go a few years without a network fee. So not that it's going to go away, but it just makes me proud to do that. We're still up against Sunday Night Football. Our research shows that we lost 20 to 30% of our audience when football came up against us on Sunday night. And no other award show has to go up against football. And it's just the way it goes. And we're still doing well. We had a very good year, the best year we've had in 8 years this year. And we still have 17, 19 million people, I think 17 million people watching. And that's pretty good when you're up against the #1 show in America for the year. And we know that could probably jump 4 or 5 million people if there was no football. But there's nowhere to go. You know, you want to move it out of the fall? Not sure. We're trying to end the season where the normal end of the season used to be, which is September, before the new shows begin. And we also don't want to move. We can't move to Saturday. I don't think it'll work. Monday through Friday, most shows are in production, which makes it more difficult for them to get their stars to the show. It's kind of where we're going to be. It's where we're going to be. We even looked at Labor Day once and realized the HUT levels weren't right for Labor Day. Not to mention double overtime for the police and everybody else. So that's where the negotiations went, and Kenny did a great job. And so did Dixon Dern, who has been the Academy lawyer for the last 30 years. So,
what about your involvement in the Emmy Awards shows themselves?
Very little. I mean, I do the old, this may be a dumb idea, but it's really done by the producer. Because for the license fee we get from the network, they get to pick the producer with our approval. They get to tell the producer what they want to see in the show. The only thing we control is the awards that are given in conjunction with the network, and the presenters have to be a balance between all networks, including cable. And we get to control the presenters not being lopsided for the network that's running it. Otherwise, we have no control over the show. But over the years, I've forged a pretty good relationship with producers like Don Misher and even Mark Burnett and Kenny Ehrlich, where I can call them and say, have you thought about this? Kenny brought back something this year that I think we should do every year, which is when the accountants come out. 8 years ago, they came out with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who said nothing, just everybody recognized him. This year, they came out with Bob Newhart. I always felt that we should have a guest accountant every year and let people guess who it's going to be. So that's one of my little things I strive for. I think I was talking about the things I wanted to change on the show, like having it run long by 20 minutes. I also wanted to see us go to 7 nominees for Best Comedy, Best Drama, Best Actor, Best Actress in a comedy and in a drama, Best Reality Show. I thought it would add more interest to the viewing audience. Haven't been able to do that. We got to 6 in a few categories, but our board just didn't want to have that many. I think they're wrong because we had 5 when there were 3 networks, and now in some categories we have 6 and we have 300 networks. So that's something I did not get accomplished because, again, I work for them. I can suggest, but I can't do. But I think it would add a lot to the show, and it would probably even help the networks who carry it because cable has become dominant in drama, and we might be able to get some network dramas into that if we went up to 7. But, you know, c'est la vie. You can only do what you can do. I had some other ideas for the show, but, you know, I think if you expand the show out 20 minutes, you can do a lot more entertainment. You can make it a lot more interesting. What I would love to do with the Emmys, but this is something I can't promote, and I'm not here anymore, is the Oscars have office pools everywhere. And I think part of the Oscar audience are people just seeing how they're doing in their pool. But I never read about any Emmy pools everywhere. And it's too bad. I know it's betting, but I do think it really ups the interest in the show. And I don't know how you get that done. That's just starts out on ground level, and if people want to do it, then great. You know, someday maybe it'll be there.
What's the significance of the Emmy itself?
Hey, it's the best excellent award in TV. I don't think when people pass on, you see Golden Globe winner in front of their name or People's Choice winner, but you do see Oscar winner and Emmy winner. It's still the iconic award for television, just like the Oscars, just like the Grammys, and just like the Tonys. Those are the 4 big awards in their areas. Now, many award shows proliferate, but for instance, the Golden Globes has 85 voters total. Those are the only people who vote. Now, that's okay, but it's a lot better when you have 18,000 voting. You might have a better idea of you might have a better choice. I think the Golden Globe is a great show. People get drunk in the audience, and it's movies and TV together, but I'm not sure it carries the prestige of the Emmys when it comes to TV. I'm a big fan of the Emmys. I as you know, was the head of the Emmy chapter in Miami called the Suncoast chapter. I got an Emmy for something really strange. They gave me a special Emmy. But I always think for a guy who did Ricky Lake and oversaw Jenny Jones, to be able to be associated with an Emmy for excellence in television makes me feel real good.
Now, speaking of,
and by the way, those shows were excellent. They were just not shows that are the same kind of show that you get Emmys for.
Speaking of Natus, you were also a part of the Natus-Addis. There was a lawsuit that took place during your tenure. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I can. Back in 2007, Natus, which is the other Emmy chapter, the other Emmy giver, years ago in 1977, the National Academy broke in 2 because the National Academy encompassed television stations and gave out local Emmys, and the Hollywood Academy, which turned into Addis, ours, gave out the Primetime Emmy. There was a fight back then because the primetime people didn't want the news director in Detroit to be voting on the primetime show, which was logical because they don't deal with that. They deal with local. And so there was a divorce. And the New York-based National Academy kept daytime news sports. The Hollywood chapter became Addis and kept primetime. And they were split then and forevermore. What happened is back in 2007, National Academy in New York decided they wanted to give out Emmys for webcasts, for things on the internet. In the divorce decree, neither side can start a new award show without permission from the other. They just announced it and went ahead. And so the only way to stop them, we thought, was to file suit against them. So we filed suit. We wound up having an arbitration because they said this was just really an extension of what television is. And we said, no, this is a whole different platform and shouldn't be given. Eventually, we won the arbitration. And eventually, the guy running the National Academy was fired because he was just very mean, I won't use any other word, about our academy. And the new person who came in as chairman, a guy named Mal Wenges, has been wonderful. We've been working together the last few years. But no one is doing a web-based award because our pitch and our winning pitch was delivery systems don't matter. We should only give awards based on excellence. And as this year proved, when Netflix was up for the best show, which is not a network show in the sense of what we think are cable and over-the-air networks, we showed that we were pretty prescient in 2007 in saying, don't worry about the delivery system. And if Amazon has a show next year that's up for an Emmy, fine. It's all content-based. I'm glad we won that because it would have been crazy otherwise. And there are shows that have popped up now like the Webbies and the Streamies. But again, none of those are a television award of the prestige of the Emmys.
Do you think Addis and Naddis will ever come back together?
They can't come together except under an Uber umbrella because one is made up of local television stations, and one which is geographical, and one is made up of different disciplines of the industry like makeup and hair and choreography and directing and acting. So they don't match. They can't come together. But they can come under one roof, which I hope someday they can, because it's a bifurcated brand. Love that word. It's a brand that's owned by two different distinct groups, yet they have one brand between them. And it's a brand that you got to protect. Like I said about the license, the major thing you got to do is protect the brand. You don't want the brand to do anything that embarrasses it. So I think the time has never looked better for the two entities to work together. We've been talking with them, and as I left, I felt pretty good because when I came in, it was bad. I remember talking to the guy running Naddis at the time and saying, and this goes right back to what I said at the beginning, if you're honest with me, we can work things out. But if I ever catch you lying to me, I'm never going to talk to you again. And he lied to me, so I never talked to him again. If it sounds crazy about honesty, that's just what I care about. And it's one of the things I care about, but it's very high up on the list. Because you know what? You can get a lot more things done if everybody tells everybody the truth and doesn't cover up and doesn't blame somebody else and isn't duplicitous behind your back and, you know, all that. It's so simple. I mean, all my rules in my mind are first-grade rules, first or second-grade rules. Do unto others. I know it sounds really silly, but it's worked for me my whole life. And if the whole business community was like that, things would work really well. But it isn't. There's all kinds of people. I'm not that naive. I just know what works for me.
What do you think has been your biggest challenge at the Television Academy?
Trying to get things through the board of governors that I think we should do that they don't agree with. I could be wrong, but generally the board as a group, which is 58 governors, is slow to move because you've got 58 distinct voices. And the TV executives may look at things different than the actors. and therefore trying to get them all to agree is very difficult. And the worst thing about it is everybody sees it through their own prism, yet they have to make an agreement on things. Very difficult. I remember during the writer's strike, I looked out in the room, and there were the TV executives and the producers sitting at the next table to the writers. And they're all fighting each other, but in our big tent, which I like to call it the big tent, they're in the room together. One of the things I love about the Emmys is it's the only place where all the parts of television can be under one roof. And I call it the big tent. And you have the Screen Actors Guild, but they're actors. You have the Directors Guild, but they're directors. Everyone has their own little section, but the Television Academy has all those sections in one place. I think that's terrific. One thing I would like to change, but it'll never happen, is I would like the Television Academy to be more like the House of Representatives than the Senate. Right now, if you have a group, one of our smallest groups is about 150 people, one of the disciplines. And one of our biggest groups is about 1,500 people. They each have 2 votes. They each have 2 governors. I always thought that you should have governors based on the size of your group. So let's say 0 to 500 gets 1 governor, and 500 to 1,000 gets 2 governors, and 1,000 to 1,500 or more gets 3 governors. I tried to float that when I first came in, and Dick Askin, the chairman, looked at me and said, "Fat chance." He says, "Why would somebody want to give up their governorship just to please your idea?" And he's right. But I still think it's a good idea for the Academy. And on top of that, I did the counting one day, and it lowered the governors from 58 to 31, which made a much more workable room. But I don't think it'll ever happen.
What do you think the Academy does best?
They do a lot of things well, but I got to go back to awarding the Emmys because, as I said, it's a pristine thing. There's the accountants and our own awards people really do a great job in making sure there's nothing that can be questioned about how the process goes. I think it's wonderful. We do a lot of other great things. We have a lot of great events. We have some seminars that help people learn. I shouldn't say we, because I just retired, but the Academy itself does a lot of good things. Probably the most prestigious thing we do isn't the Emmy show. To me, it's the Hall of Fame, because the Emmy show awards shows for that year, but the Hall of Fame awards recipients for a lifetime of work. And to me, that's the best thing we do, because that's pretty damn good. And then you get your picture out front in a bust or a bas relief or whatever, and you live for years and years out there. I think it's the best thing we do because that's really rewarding the television icons, people who've made a difference. And it's going to be better as years go on because the original batch of people, for the most part, are white males, but that's because the first 20, 30 years of TV were mostly white males. As we're moving along now, you're going to get more diversity in the award winners because television became more diverse. So to people who say, how come you have so many white guys? The answer is because the first 30 years of TV was mostly white guys. And in time, everything changes. It's like me putting on the black anchor or the Cuban anchor. Before them, it was just white guys. And things change. So now we have a president who is African-American. So see, things change. Now, I don't know what president we'll have when this is finally aired, but...
What do you think is your legacy at the TV Academy?
I don't know if I have a legacy. I was just one of the guys passing through. I think I helped strengthen the financial aspects of the Academy big time. I think that's one that'll be a legacy for a while. I think turning the magazine into 9 issues instead of 6 was a legacy, because when I first came and we were doing 6, I was thinking of dumping it to 4 because it was losing money. But we looked at it carefully and we decided, well, if we do some extra magazines during elections time, meaning show election time, we can sell it, and it was good for our members, and it's good for us. And so we moved up to 9 already. We still have a couple that lose money at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, but you can't dump them out. So I think that's a plus that I helped accomplish. I think I accomplished a lot of things I can't even remember now. But, you know, you do it in the day-to-day and the week-to-week. And I am not a fan of 5-year plans. I think the television and almost any industry changes too fast. You might be able to do a 2-year plan. But after that, and I've never had a long-term plan in any of my jobs. My jobs have always been here and now, and what can I do in the next year? And maybe that doesn't sit well with some of the consultants or whoever they may be, but it's worked for me. And I don't think Cap Cities had a long-term plan, and I don't think Post and Newsweek had a long-term plan. The plan was to make sure you have a strong company and you do well, and that's it. Why do you need 5 years out when nobody has an idea what's going to go on 2 years out? And especially in TV, how rapidly it changes. So, yeah, I'm not a long-term planner. But when I look back and see I've been here 8 years when I've never had a job before that lasted more than 4, I'm absolutely astounded. That's why I think it's one of the best jobs of my life. The pressure was different. The pressure was done from people who were in charge of you, and there were many. Between the foundation and the academy, I had over 100 bosses that could call at any time and give me their idea of how to make things better. So I had to handle them. My other jobs, the pressure was time, news, production timetables, getting a show on the air in time. I always used to laugh when I was at the studios that we had about 1 hour of enjoyment when we said, we've sold enough stations, it's a go. And then 60 minutes later you said, oh my God, it's a go. We have to make 180 shows. And the difference at the Academy is you didn't have that kind of pressure. You had a different kind of. You had people pressure as opposed to time and production pressure. And it was different, and I enjoyed it. I like dealing with people, some of whom I didn't like, some of whom I liked a lot. I always tried to put the head of someone I liked on the body of someone I disliked, so I could deal with them as if they were someone I liked. I know that sounds weird, but that's how I dealt with it.
Yeah, if it works.
It worked for me. It worked for me.
Anything to say about the foundation?
A foundation is, when people used to ask me, what does the Academy do? The first thing I would bring up was all the wonderful programs at the foundation, because that's the goody two-shoes part that gives back. And when you worked in the business for almost 50 years and you want to give back, that's the part that gives back. The Emmys are awards for the year. The foundations are internships and scholarships and all the good things our foundation does, the archive interviews. And those are the ones I'm proud of, because when you talk to other people, you want to show them what you do that you're proud of. And giving an Emmy is nice, but it's fleeting. Year to year is fleeting. The foundation is there to give kids a better chance to just make you feel good about being in TV and giving back. And so the answer about the foundation is that's the stuff I bring up first when people ask, what'd you do at the Academy?
Yeah, that's great. So you recently stepped down. What are you up to these days?
Retirement. I'm enjoying it. I have a bucket list of 1,000 things to do, but at least 6 that are very big on the list. From golf to travel to playing the piano to learning Spanish. I will be very busy. And I want to volunteer. My wife is currently volunteering once a week at a hospital with our therapy dog. When she goes visits kids with cancer and things like that, she's very fulfilled with that. I want to mention something about my wife. We've now been married 22 years, which is longer than my first marriage, which makes me feel I did it right the second time. My 2 daughters, who are now in their 40s, early 40s, are just wonderful kids. My oldest daughter sells commercials for the NBC station in Miami, and the youngest daughter used to sell commercials for Fox Sports in South Florida, but when she got married, she didn't like going to a sporting event every night, plus working every day. So she gave that up and went to a different job. But they both went into sales in television, just like their stepmother, and enjoyed it and did very well at it, and one's still in it. And the one who isn't in it only because she had to go to baseball games, football games, hockey games, and basketball games as part of her job. And it might sound great, but now when you add them all together. So she finally got out of TV. But I'm proud of both of them. They both live in the Fort Lauderdale area. And so by not moving from Miami for those years really helped get them settled. I'm very proud of them. They both went to college out of town. They both settled in Atlanta and San Francisco. They both met guys from Miami, and everybody moved back. Talk about strange coincidences. Oh, I have a coincidence to talk about. I'm in a parking lot years ago waiting for a car, and I'm standing next to Arsenio Hall. And I bring up the fact that I grew up in Cleveland, and so did he. So I asked him, where'd you grow up? And he said, when I was a kid, I grew up on 118th Street. And I said, I grew up on 118th Street before I was 10 years old. And we start talking, and we start narrowing it down and narrowing it down. And the end of it is this. Arsenio Hall and I grew up in the same house. I was downstairs. He was upstairs. He was 20 years after me. But we wound up growing up in the same house. Now, the odds on that got to be what? 3 million to 1 or something? First, that I even met him and talked to him about it. Secondly, that when we figured it out it was the same house. And I love little coincidences like that because it's just fun. This happened to me on Thanksgiving in '92. I'm at Art's Deli in Studio City having breakfast with someone I know. And on the way out, we stop at the table next to us because the fellow I'm having breakfast with knows the fellow at the next table who's having breakfast with Andy Garcia. So we introduce each other, and we talk a minute, and I thank Andy for the work he did in Miami after Hurricane Andrew because he was down there loading boxes and things like that, and it was just a wonderful thing to do. And I told him I had just moved from Miami 6 months earlier. Well, I had moved to Cincinnati, but I felt I was a Miamian. And I thanked him profusely because he really did unload trucks and stuff. He was a good guy. Fine. That's it. Goodbye. The next day, I pick up my daughter from college, and we're going to Vaughn's out in Toluca Lake on the way home to pick up some food first, right? And she says, will we meet any stars? And I says, this is L.A., you never know. And as we're going down the aisle, coming our way, pushing a cart, is Andy Garcia, who says, hi, Alan. I say, hi, Andy, and we move on. My daughter is floored. You know Andy Garcia? Yeah, I've known him for 24 hours. Now, that was '92. This is 2013. I bet you can guess how many times I've seen Andy Garcia since then. 0. But I love these little stories and coincidences because they do happen. And being in L.A., the line we use all the time is, if it looks like someone who's a celebrity, it generally is. And the other line my wife and I use all the time is, if it happens in real life, it's already happened on Seinfeld. Because they covered every one of life's little bits.
Well, what do you think's the secret to your success in the business?
An overworked word, passion. I love television. I love TV, and every job I've had ups and downs, but overall it was wonderful. It really was. My secret is simply love the job you're doing, and I've always wanted to be in TV ever since we got our black and white in 1952. And I wanted to do something in it. I always wanted to be a disc jockey, not with this voice, so then I decided I'd go into television. And I've had a fascinating career. I've met a lot of people that I forgot to mention here, but there's been tons of people who have gone on to great careers. Oh, I hired a woman in Miami named Judy Gerard, who went on to become president of the Food Channel. There's a lot of people that I've helped in their careers who have helped my career, and they've had great careers. And it's just nice to know that they did well. I've never felt like I wanted to hire people who weren't as good as me. I always wanted to hire people who were better than me. And I've done that, and I'm very proud of that because as a team, we could do a lot more than these people who always want to be the smartest guy in the room or the smartest girl in the room. No, 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 no. You want the group to be the smartest group in the room. And it's worked out well for me. And now I can look back at it, and I'm sort of at peace. And I realize now, looking back at it and doing this thing, I had a fun career. I really did. And there were ups and downs, of course. And I was rich and I was poor. And I started out with no money. And I owed $4,000 in college loans when I got out, which I think is the equivalent of about 35 grand today. I paid them off. I didn't declare bankruptcy. I can't believe some kids do that. And I was very lucky to be able to get through college with a decent grade point average after my first 2 years and get into TV and just bounce around. I want to mention one thing in this interview. When I was a sophomore at Ohio State, somebody said to me, "Do you know there's a guy in Cleveland running a TV station with your last name?" I said, "No." He said, "Yeah, you should check that out." So I found out that the guy running the ABC station in Cleveland was named Don Perris. So I called him up. First he thought it was his brother calling because it's the same name. And then we talked, and I went in to see him and eventually found out that, I don't know if you call it third or fourth cousins, our grandfathers were brothers and our great-grandfather was the same guy. I didn't have a clue about him. I didn't know he worked in TV, didn't know anything about it. But I met him, and then I would talk to him a couple times a year. And looking back over my career, I realized that this guy was probably responsible for my first 3 jobs. Because when I worked at the public station, the lady who ran it used to be a director for him. When I went to the independent station, they were looking for people, and I'm sure they called him to ask him about anybody in town. I'm just positive. He never would mention this. And then when I worked in my first job in programming in West Virginia, the boss was Don's old news director. So here I am, an old guy, now at this point saying, "Oh my God, why didn't I ever figure this out?" But he was very quiet about it, never said a word. But I have a feeling the relative helped me get jobs early on when nobody knew who I was. After that, I did it on my own. But I must thank him. He was just a terrific guy and a very smart guy. And he managed a different way. I was told that one of my executive producers of news years later in Miami told me they used to work for Don, and he called a meeting one day with people from his news department. And they came into the room, and he's sitting there looking at everybody going, "Vit, vit, vit, vit." And they're all saying, "What the hell is he talking about?" And he says, "Every night at 11:30, I don't hear, 'It's the Dick Cavett Show.' I hear, 'Vit Show.' You're running 3 seconds late in the news, and I don't want to hear that again." I don't know why I remembered that story, but it shows you that paying attention to the details is always important. And that comes back to me from my traffic days when people would call at home and say, "I can't find the boron commercial." And I said, "Check number 2047. I couldn't do that today. I don't know what I had for breakfast, but back then I knew every one of the 2,000 or 3,000 commercials up on the shelf. And back in Cleveland, I started listening to voices, not like strange voices on the radio. And because I didn't have a voice, I always respected great voices. I found a guy in Willoughby, Ohio, named Bob Vernon, who had this magnificent voice. And we hired him to do the book, to be the announcer for the TV station. And Bob Vernon eventually went on to be the afternoon guy at WNBC in New York. Proud of him. Then Jeff Kay, of course, in Buffalo, went on to be the NFL guy. But I didn't discover him, but I really respected him. Charlie Van Dyke out of Phoenix, who does the voiceover for stations here in L.A., K-Earth and others. I hired him in Miami to be my voice at the Miami TV station. And then when I switched stations, I brought him to the other station. I'm a big voice guy. When I was in Jacksonville, I hired a guy named, forgot his first name, Allen is his last name, another guy who was so good that his voice made the station sound right. And it's the same thing that happened out here with Ernie Anderson and KABC and WABC, who used to promote eyewitness news. These voices mean a lot. They make you sound professional. And I always was on the lookout for these voices. And like I said about anchor people, you got to listen to the voice. Can't just look at them. And I always was a big voice guy. And same with reporters. I don't want some pretty thing with a squeaky voice. If she's a pretty thing, she better have a voice that commands respect, or we'll move on to someone who isn't as pretty that commands respect with her voice. And that's one of my many little rules in my head, which you're getting some of today. But the biggest rule I can give you is first grade. Treat everybody as you would want to be treated.
How has television changed since you started in the business?
There were 3 channels. There was no choice, and there was no tape recorder. You either saw it or you missed it. And nowadays you can binge view on anything you want to see. There's all these different delivery systems. I think it's all wonderful, by the way. I think it's always changing for the better, and it will change again. I am not concerned about all these changes ruining anything. The one pet peeve I have, by the way, is the media who 25 years ago, 30 years ago, told about how cable would kill off the networks. There would be no original networks anymore. Now here we are, and the latest I read this year was the 4 old-time networks are up over last year. They haven't been killed. They're not dead. Yet the critics for 25 years have said the demise of network television. Now the critics, who were wrong on that, have moved on to the Amazons and the Netflixes are going to kill off television as we know it. No, there's room for all this. What gets me crazy is none of this critics and media ever say, well, we were wrong on the first one. They just move on to the next one. And some of the media is great, some of the reporters are fabulous, and some of them just want to look for a story even if it's not there. And I don't think anything is cannibalizing anything. I think it's just making more options for more things to be seen. That's my viewpoint. And in 20 years, we'll see if I was right.
What about the business itself?
Oh, it's all different. All different. Back in local TV, it used to be a money machine. Now it's more difficult. Now it's much more difficult in local TV. And it's probably more difficult to network. The network doesn't get to operate on a regular playing field. I'm talking about our wheel networks. They can't do the sex and violence and words that you can do on cable. And to me, that puts them at a disadvantage. And you wonder why all these dramatic shows are up for Emmys that are on cable. It's because they have more freedom than the networks do. And that's sad, but that's the rule of life. Yet the networks can still get 6, 8, 10, 12 million people watching a show, and a success on cable can be 2 million people, although a few of the reality shows are getting 10 and 12 million people now on cable. Yet if you look at the top 70 or 80 shows every week in audience size, there's a few cable shows and about 95% wheel network shows still. And here it is 30 years after they predicted the demise of network television. So it has changed, but I think TV's changing with it. I am not sure, I don't know if we'll ever go back to it, but when I was a kid, the sponsor owned the whole show. And they could work the commercials into the show. I remember back in radio, Jack Benny's commercials were always part of the television, of the radio show, and many others, and Fibber McGee and Molly. It was worked into the show. Until someone buys an entire show, I don't think that can happen, but you can work it into a show. And if nothing else, the product placement is going to help the networks make some money, as long as it isn't too much in your face. It's changing, and I'm sure there are people a lot smarter than me that can figure out where it's going. I'm in the now, but I do believe that television does not cannibalize other television. It just makes more people watch more stuff. That's my feeling on television.
Well, speaking of the business, way back, you kind of developed an accounting procedure to help stations manage their budgets. Can you talk about that?
Yes, this was something I think I helped invent back when I was at either Cap Cities or Post Newsweek. I can't remember where. Television stations used to buy product, and if you spent $100,000 on 100 episodes of a show, every time you ran it, you'd write off $1,000, right? But that meant that if you wrote it off in the first year at 1,000, you were still writing it off in the fifth year as 1,000. And I thought there was something wrong with that system. And I also found out in some places that they would take a show off the air at the end of a year and put on a cheaper show so they could save money on their budget, which made no sense at all to the audience. So I developed something called Sum of the Digits, S-U-M, Sum of the Digits. And what that was you took the length of contract for a rerun show, let's say it's 4 years, and you put 40% on the first year, 30% on the second, 20 and 10. So if you bought a show for $100,000, it would be 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, 10, which added up to 100, which was the sum of the digits. If you did a 5-year deal, it'd be 33, 27, whatever those numbers are. And we had to prove this accounting system was correct, and we had to go to the FTC, if I recall. I was in Washington at the time to get approval, because you had to prove to them that the first rerun was more valuable than the last rerun. And we had to go in with all kinds of research to show that a syndicated show will be more valuable the first year it's in syndication than the last. And as you notice, even today, whether it's Big Bang or Seinfeld or whatever, they may be a little off, they may be strong for 2 runs, but eventually they start to go downhill. And that accounting procedure led to being able to keep a fairly even line on your expense budget by when shows went to 30% and 20%, you could buy new shows that would bump it back up to the 40 or 50% level. So you could keep your budget fairly stable year after year after year. And they approved that, and I think I put that into effect at Cap Cities, and then I put it in effect at Post-Newsweek. And I was very proud of that because I'm not a business guy. I'm just a common sense guy. But that worked, and a lot of these companies went to it, and I'm very proud of that. Yes.
And they still use it.
I assume they do. I've been on a local TV a long time. This did not apply to first-run shows. If it was an Oprah Winfrey, you wrote it off as each show. But a rerun show is different because it's the same show losing value each time it plays. It probably doesn't work for I Love Lucy, but otherwise it works.
What advice would you give to an aspiring TV executive today?
Do you think people aspire to be an executive?
I think so.
I think they aspire to be talent or directors or things like that. I kind of fell into it. I mean, I started running camera. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a director. That's what I wanted to be, a TV director. And I got to direct a couple of educational shows. But when the opportunity came along for a better paying job at a commercial TV station, I didn't have the skills to be a director. So I became a manager by becoming a traffic manager, even though I didn't know what the hell I was doing, because there's a difference between one Smokey the Bear every 2 hours and 24 commercials in an hour. But I was smart enough to learn how to do it, and that's how I became a manager. At 24 or something, I had a staff of 3. So I don't know how you fall into it. I fell into it, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the headaches. Once you have more than one employee, you always have headaches between people. But in the big scheme of things, it's nothing. I don't know how you become a TV executive. I think research is a good way to go. I mean, you got to start as the grunt somewhere, in some area, and you will eventually become an executive. I had a cameraman working for me in Miami named David Garfinkel. He ran camera out of Florida State University. He now runs a big production house out here in L.A. called Renegade 83, and he's done all kinds of shows, from a science fiction show called 4400 to this show where the people are dropped off in the jungle naked and have to get back or something like that. But he's a good producer of television shows. He was a cameraman. How did he become a producer? How did he become an executive? He came out here, he bought a camera, he did pieces for Robin Leach's show, and eventually built his camera into a couple of cameras, and he became a segment producer and then started his own company. Good guy. But I had a lot of people work for me who did very well. Lynn was doing promotion, and now she runs a big promotion company out here in L.A. Sometimes you just need drive and stick-to-itiveness. Does that sound old-fashioned? Just keep plugging along. Just keep plugging along.
You mentioned in interviews that you'd often use, you want to see the person being passionate about television or have that knowledge of pop culture. Is there anything else that you looked for? Because you've discovered really so many people.
You look for some smarts. You don't want dumb people, but you can't really tell that always in an interview. But I figure if you know enough about pop culture, you probably know enough to do your job. Television is not brain surgery. It's common sense coupled with hard work. And that's the way I look at it. And you can be successful many ways. I'm sure if you interview some of the people in the archives who are producers and successes, they didn't plan on it. It just happened, but they were good at it. I remember I read a biography of Jack Benny, a real biography that he had in the back of a closet for years that his daughter discovered. I think it was called Sundays at 7. And there was a line in there I've always remembered. It said, "I never planned on being a vaudeville star. I never planned on being a radio star. I never planned on being a TV star. I just got on the train and it took me there." And I always remember the line because sometimes when you plan, surprise, it doesn't work out. But if you get into something you love passionately and just keep plugging along, good things might happen. I can say that because it happened to me. If it didn't happen to me, I probably would have said, what a crazy industry. I don't like it. But it happened to me, so I'm very proud of it.
It's a great answer.
But it's true. What else can I tell you? It's you want to be a TV executive, start pulling cable. The one thing I knew is I was never felt entitled. I started at the bottom. I cleaned the floors. I did all the grunt work. And a year and a half later, I was a manager, just by accident and the help of maybe my distant cousin. But, and I got the job only because that was my title at the public station, traffic manager. Oh, you're a traffic manager. Well, not the kind you're looking for, but I'll take the job anyway. I remember bounding up the stairs of our third-floor walk-up tile-covered apartment in Cleveland saying, I'm getting paid $8,400. Let's see, I was being paid, I think, $6,000 a year at the public station. Finally, I got up past minimum wage. And when I went for the job of traffic manager, they said, well, how much are you earning now? And I made up $8,000. See, honesty isn't always the best policy. In certain ways, you got it right. And they said, well, okay. And I said, but I can't move for $8,000. I have to have more. And they paid me $8,400 a year. This is 1967, which is now probably the equivalent of 30 or 40 grand. That was great because I went from minimum wage to that kind of salary in a year and a half. Talk about lucky. And talk about chutzpah. I had a lot of chutzpah many times in my young career, and that served me well when I was running stations against the machines in Jacksonville or the machines in Miami, because I was also working for a company that wanted me to have the chutzpah. It always depends on if somebody's got your back, and the Washington Post was a great company. Cap Cities was a great company. And then out here working for the studios, there are some strange people at the studios, some that don't tell you the truth. But in the area I was in, it was all based on performance. When I first came to town, I met with a guy who's just a wonderful guy who said to me the first week I was here, please remember that L.A. is not a meritocracy. I said, what do you mean? He said, just because you do well doesn't mean you're going to move ahead. And just because you're not good doesn't mean you won't get ahead. I said, well, that sounds all screwed up. He said, but that's the way it works. I said, okay. I said, now that you've told me, I still believe in do a good job, get rewarded, do a bad job, get fired. So simple. I'm Mr. Simple because it's too complicated otherwise. And so, but I realized his advice was somewhat right. There are people who are great in meetings. There are people who have never had a hit but somehow do pilot after pilot after pilot and make a lot of money. I don't understand it, but I'm from Cleveland. What the hell do I know?
What do you think is your greatest achievement?
Well, besides the maudlin answer of my 2 daughters, which is pretty good, they're pretty terrific people, and a couple of granddaughters. My achievement in business, I think, is I never really made enemies. I was honest with people, and I remember when I was at the studios, and I'd get 1,000 pitches a year, and I had to pick one show. Now, how do you let 999 people down that come in with their baby, and you want to tell them their baby's ugly? And I had a way of doing it where I just said, hey, look, I got to pick one out of 1,000, and this isn't it. And Perris told me a story when he first came out here. Some guy came in and pitched him a game show, and he didn't like it. He says, I don't like it. I don't want to buy it. And the guy said, what's wrong with it? And Perris was too new to say, I don't want to discuss it. He said, well, here's what I think's wrong with it. And he goes, this, and this. And the guy says, what the hell do you know? And storms out. And so you learn then that if you're going to say no, they don't hear anything past the no, but give them a nice no. And I became friends with a lot of people I never bought a show from because you treat them with a little dignity and you say, hey, it's just not for me, or it's not what we're looking for now, or whatever you say. But you don't say the baby's ugly, even though it might be. And so I think probably my greatest achievement was being able to deal with people without getting their ire and being friends with all these people. You know, that's been good. And the best part, and I know this sounds weird, is every job I've had, I've made a whole new group of friends. And I came to the academy, you know, in middle 60s, 63, 64 years of age, and all of a sudden I know hundreds of new people. It's great. It's great. And when I get real old and have no mind at all, everyone will be new. But right now, what I love most of all is you have room in your heart and in yourself to meet new people and like new people and make new friends. I think that's cool. I think it really is. Because you never know who you're going to meet tomorrow that's going to be fun to hang out with. You never know. So, yeah, that's why I'm kind of passionate about TV and the people I meet in TV. And our best friends aren't in TV, by the way. I think that also helped. The biggest problem with being the boss is you can't be friends with the employees. That's the biggest, hardest problem. You can like a lot of employees, but you can't hang out with them. And so that's tough because there are a lot of people I wanted to hang out with, but you can't. You can't play one favorite and not another, so you just don't hang out with any of them. So a lot of my kids and stuff I'm friends with now, but I wasn't friends with them when they were working for me because that would be wrong. So, and, you know, you have a business friendship, but then a real friendship comes later. And, and so, you know, I might like you later.
Any regrets in your career?
You know, there were forks in the road all the time, but I have no idea where they would have led. I was once offered the job as program director at KCBS when I was in Buffalo, maybe, and or Washington. I had a contract in Washington. I was offered a job to come out to program KCBS, and I'd be out in Hollywood, and I was only like, you know, 33 years old or 31 years old. Not only couldn't I go legally, but I didn't want to go to my boss and ask to be released, which I think he would have done. Who knows where that would have gone? Would that have gone into the studios earlier, into the network? I don't know. But the fact is, you can't look back and look at all the forks in the road and say, I should have gone this way. You just, whatever happens, happens. And, you know, it's like I was lucky because I got some great jobs. I had some great bosses. I had some bosses I didn't like working for. I think I've had 14 jobs in 13 cities, and I think I've had 14 or 15 bosses. That's a lot when you start to look back on it. And some were good, some were drunk, some were mean, some were wonderful. And what can I tell you? That's just the way life goes. But overall, you look back and you say, all right, I enjoyed what I did, and I'm proud, as this interview shows, that when I'm actually thinking about it in chronological order, I'm very proud of all the things I did.
You should be.
Because I think about little things, but I don't put them all together in a chronological order until this. So I thank you very much for helping me sort some of this. I'm sure I left lots of stories out, but they'll come to me tonight after it's all over.
Of course. Our last question is, how would you like to be remembered?
Jack Benny, who's my idol, as you can tell, has a tomb at Hillside. And on the side of it, it says, Jack Benny, a gentle man. And I really want to be remembered that way. I'm a gentle guy. And I never raise my voice to people. And, you know, you can fire people without raising your voice or be nasty. You could reprimand people that way. But I've always been gentle with people because I want to be treated the same way. Haven't always been treated the same way, but I've always wanted to be treated the same way. And that, I think, probably is the way I want to be remembered, even though I'm stealing it from Jack Benny, which I couldn't think of anybody better to steal it from.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Alan. It's been a pleasure and an honor to interview you.
Thank you so much.
It's been years in the making.
Thank you so much for doing this. I still don't think I really belong in the same category as many of these interviewees, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.